I found out my HOA board had stolen our emergency fund when I opened an email attachment showing 5 middle-aged women sipping margaritas on a Mexican beach, and the subject line read, "Leadership Development in Progress." My name is David Martinez, and I had lived in Sunset Meadows, a planned community in Gilbert, Arizona, for 6 years. The development was built in 2016, featuring 240 homes arranged in neat cul-de-sacs with pristine landscaping, and a community center that hosted events nobody attended. I worked from home as a software developer, which meant I witnessed far more HOA drama than the average resident. My wife Sarah taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, and we had 2 kids, Emma and Jake, who were 8 and 6 respectively. We loved our house, a 4-bedroom Spanish-style home with a pool in the backyard, but the HOA had always been a thorn in our side with their endless rules about fence heights, mailbox colors, and approved plant species. The board president was a woman named Brenda Hutchinson, a 52-year-old retired real estate agent who treated the HOA like her personal fiefdom. She had bottle blonde hair that she wore in a severe bob, oversized sunglasses that never left her face even indoors, and a wardrobe consisting entirely of pastel pantsuits. Her second-in-command was Patricia Sullivan, the treasurer, who was slightly younger but equally insufferable. The other board members were Karen Whitmore, the secretary, along with 2 other women named Deborah and Linda, who mostly nodded along with whatever Brenda said. The email that exposed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in March 2024. I was drinking my 2nd cup of coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from our HOA email group. Usually, these messages contained passive-aggressive reminders about trash, can placement, or upcoming violations hearings. This one was different. The sender was Patricia Sullivan, and she had apparently meant to send the photo to her personal email, but accidentally hit reply all to a thread containing every homeowner in Sunset Meadows. The image showed all 5 board members lounging by an infinity pool overlooking the Caribbean Sea. Brenda wore a wide-brimmed hat and held a drink garnished with pineapple. The caption read, "Day 3 of our board retreat, so grateful for this opportunity to strengthen our leadership skills. The workshop on effective communication starts after lunch." I stared at my phone, scrolling down to see the replies already flooding in. My neighbor across the street, Tom Henderson, had written, "Is this a joke? The board is in Cancun." Another neighbor, Maria Garcia, who lived 2 houses down, replied, "We were just told we couldn't afford to repave the community center parking lot because our emergency fund was depleted." What the hell is this? I walked outside, still holding my phone, and saw Tom standing in his driveway wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt that read, "World's Okayest Dad." He was a high school history teacher with a dry sense of humor and a low tolerance for bureaucratic nonsense. "Did you see this?" I called out, holding up my phone. "I saw it," Tom said, walking over to my driveway. "How much do you want to bet they used HOA funds for that trip?" "I would bet my entire savings," I said. "Remember last month when they said they had to increase our dues by 15% because of unexpected maintenance costs?" Tom nodded grimly. "And they canceled the 4th of July fireworks because the budget was too tight." Sarah came outside, having seen the commotion from the kitchen window. "What is going on?" I showed her the photo. Her expression shifted from confusion to fury in approximately 2 seconds. "Are you kidding me right now?" "They told me we couldn't allocate funds for new playground equipment because it was not in the budget. The slide is literally broken. A kid scraped his knee on a sharp edge last week." Within an hour, the community Facebook page exploded with activity. Nearly every homeowner in Sunset Meadows had seen the photo and was demanding answers. Someone created a new thread titled "Emergency Meeting Required." and within minutes, it had over 100 comments. I decided to call our property management company, Desert Oasis Management, which handled the day-to-day operations for our HOA. A woman named Jennifer answered, and I could hear the stress in her voice before I even explained why I was calling. "Yes, Mr. Martinez, we are aware of the situation," Jennifer said. "I have received 47 phone calls this morning. I am trying to get in touch with Mrs. Hutchinson, but she is not answering her phone." "When did the board leave for Cancun?" I asked. There was a pause. "I was informed it was a board retreat scheduled for this week. I was told it was approved at the last board meeting." "Was it funded by the HOA?" I pressed. "I cannot comment on financial details without board approval," Jennifer said carefully. "However, I can tell you that an emergency homeowners meeting can be called if 10% of residents submit a written request." I thanked her and hung up, then immediately started a group text with Tom, Maria, and several other neighbors I trusted. Within 30 minutes, we had organized a plan. We needed 24 signatures to force an emergency meeting, representing 10% of our 240 homes. I printed out a petition and started walking door to door. The response was overwhelming. People were furious. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow who lived at the end of my street, actually started crying when I explained what happened. "They fined me $200 last month because my rose bushes were the wrong shade of pink," she said, her voice shaking. "They said it violated the community aesthetic guidelines." "I am on a fixed income, Mr. Martinez. I had to skip my medication to pay that fine, and they are drinking cocktails in Mexico?" By the end of the day, I had 63 signatures. Tom had collected 42. Maria brought in 38. We submitted the petition to Desert Oasis Management at 4 in the afternoon, and Jennifer confirmed that an emergency meeting would be scheduled for the following Monday evening, giving the board members time to return from their trip. The next few days were tense. Brenda finally posted a statement on the community Facebook page Friday morning. The board retreat was a necessary investment in leadership development and was approved through proper channels. "We are disappointed by the negative reaction and look forward to addressing concerns at Monday's meeting. Please remember that board members are volunteers who sacrifice their time for this community." The post received 317 angry reactions and 209 comments, most of which questioned how spending thousands of dollars on a beach vacation constituted sacrificing their time. Sarah and I spent the weekend researching Arizona HOA law. We discovered that board members had a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of the community, and that misappropriation of funds could constitute both civil and criminal offenses. Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 33 to 1810, outlined strict requirements for HOA financial management, including detailed record-keeping and transparency requirements. Monday evening arrived and the community center was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. I estimated over 200 residents had shown up, which was unprecedented. Normally, HOA meetings drew maybe 15 people, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. Brenda sat at the front table with the other board members, all wearing serious expressions. Patricia had a stack of papers in front of her. Karen was typing furiously on her laptop, presumably taking minutes. Brenda called the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. "Good evening, everyone. I know there has been some concern about the board retreat, and we want to address those concerns transparently. Patricia, would you please explain the financial details?" Patricia stood up, adjusting her reading glasses. The board retreat cost a total of $9,342, which covered airfare, hotel accommodations, meals, and registration for leadership development workshops. This expense was approved at our January board meeting and was categorized as professional development. What fund did it come from? Tom called out from the audience. Patricia hesitated. It was allocated from our reserve fund. The room erupted. People were shouting over each other. I stood up, projecting my voice over the chaos. Our reserve fund is supposed to be for emergencies only. That money is for roof repairs, plumbing disasters, things that cannot wait. It is not for beach vacations. Brenda slammed her gavel on the table. Mr. Martinez, you are out of order. The board has discretion over how reserve funds are allocated, and we determined that leadership development was essential for effective governance. Show us the receipts, Maria demanded. Show us exactly what this leadership development consisted of. That information is confidential, Brenda said. Like hell it is, someone shouted from the back. This is our money. We have a right to see where it went. A man named Robert Chen, Mrs. Chen's son who was an attorney, stood up. Actually, under Arizona law, homeowners have the right to inspect HOA financial records with reasonable notice. I submitted a formal request this afternoon. You have 10 business days to comply, or I will file a motion to compel with the court. Brenda's face turned red. This is harassment. The board will not be bullied by a mob. This is not a mob, I said. This is 200 homeowners who pay dues every month and deserve accountability. You spent $9,000 of our money on a vacation and called it professional development. We want documentation and we want it now. The meeting devolved into shouting matches for another 40 minutes. Finally, a motion was made to hold a special election to recall the entire board. The vote was nearly unanimous, with only 3 people voting against it, probably Brenda's personal friends. The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Robert Chen filed his motion to compel the HOA to release financial records. The court granted it within 5 days, and what we discovered was far worse than anyone had imagined. The financial records showed that the Cancun trip was not an isolated incident. Over the past 18 months, the board had spent over $47,000 on various professional development and community leadership expenses. There were charges for spa visits, expensive dinners, concert tickets, and even a weekend trip to Las Vegas that had been categorized as conference attendance. All of this money had come from our emergency reserve fund, which was now sitting at $12,000, far below the recommended minimum of 6 months' operating expenses. I sat at my dining room table with Sarah, going through the printed bank statements. My hands were shaking. This is fraud, Sarah said quietly. This is not incompetence or bad judgment. This is theft, I nodded. We need to call the police. Tom, Maria, Robert, and several other concerned homeowners met at my house that evening. Robert reviewed the documents carefully, making notes on a legal pad. This is definitely actionable, he said. Arizona law makes it a felony to misappropriate HOA funds over a certain threshold. We are well past that threshold. I think we need to file a police report and also pursue civil litigation to recover the funds. Will the police actually do anything? Maria asked. I thought white-collar crime was hard to prosecute. It can be, Robert admitted, but we have clear documentation and the amounts are significant. Plus, this is a fairly straightforward case. They used money that was not theirs for personal benefit. That is embezzlement. The next morning, I went to the Gilbert Police Department and filed a report. The officer who took my statement, Officer Rodriguez, seemed genuinely interested in the case. How much are we talking about? He asked. $47,000 over 18 months, I said, sliding the folder of financial records across his desk. He whistled low. That is not small potatoes. Let me get this to our financial crimes unit. They will probably want to talk to you and see all the documentation. 2 days later, I received a call from Detective Sarah Mills, who worked in the Financial Crimes Division. She was professional and thorough, asking detailed questions about the HOA structure, how funds were supposed to be managed, and what documentation we had. I sent her everything Robert had compiled. Meanwhile, the recall election was approaching. Brenda and her board members were fighting back hard. They sent out a mass email claiming they were being persecuted by a small group of malcontents who did not understand how HOA governance worked. They argued that their professional development was necessary and reasonable. The email backfired spectacularly. People who had been on the fence about the recall were now firmly against the board. The tone-deaf defensiveness, combined with the mounting evidence of financial mismanagement, sealed their fate. The recall election took place on a Saturday in early April. We had to rent additional voting machines to accommodate the turnout. 87% of homeowners voted, which Robert said was probably a record for HOA elections in Arizona. The results were not even close. All 5 board members were recalled with over 90% of votes in favor of removal. An interim board was appointed, consisting of Robert Chen, Tom Henderson, and 3 other homeowners with financial or legal backgrounds. Their first action was to hire an independent forensic accountant to review all HOA finances going back 3 years. The forensic accountant, a woman named Linda Wu, worked for 2 weeks before presenting her findings at a community meeting. The news was even worse than we had feared. The total misappropriation was closer to $63,000 when you included expenses that had been deliberately miscategorized or hidden in vague line items. The previous board had also awarded themselves stipends that were never approved by the homeowners, totaling another $12,000. "This is systematic fraud," Linda said, her expression grave. "These individuals knowingly and deliberately diverted HOA funds for personal use. They attempted to conceal their actions through creative accounting and vague categorization. This was not an accident." Detective Mills attended that meeting. Afterward, she approached me and Robert. "I have enough to move forward with criminal charges," she said. "The Maricopa County Attorney's Office is reviewing the case now. Based on what I have seen, I expect charges will be filed within the next few weeks." True to her word, criminal charges were filed against all 5 former board members in late April. Brenda Hutchinson, Patricia Sullivan, and Karen Whitmore were each charged with felony theft and fraudulent schemes, both Class 3 felonies under Arizona law. Deborah and Linda, who had been less involved in the financial decisions, were charged with lesser offenses. The arraignment was scheduled for early May. Sarah and I attended, along with at least 50 other homeowners who wanted to see justice served. The courtroom was tense. Brenda arrived wearing a conservative navy suit, her lawyer by her side. She looked smaller somehow, diminished without her usual bravado. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Patricia Torres, reviewed the charges. "Mrs. Hutchinson, you are charged with theft over $25,000 and fraudulent schemes. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Brenda said, her voice barely above a whisper. The same scene repeated for each defendant. All pleaded not guilty. Bail was set, and they were released pending trial. As we were leaving the courthouse, Brenda approached me in the hallway. Her lawyer tried to stop her, but she waved him off. "I hope you are happy," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "You have destroyed my reputation over a misunderstanding." "Everything I did was for the community." I looked at her for a long moment. "You spent $63,000 of our money on spa treatments, fancy dinners, and beach vacations. You fined elderly people on fixed incomes for having the wrong color flowers, while you were drinking champagne on our dime. You lied to us, you stole from us, and you showed absolutely no remorse until you got caught. So yes, I am happy that you are being held accountable." She opened her mouth to respond, but her lawyer pulled her away before she could say anything else. The civil lawsuit proceeded in parallel with the criminal case. The HOA, now under new management, sued the former board members to recover all misappropriated funds plus interest and legal fees. Robert handled the case pro bono, saying it was the most satisfying work he had done in years. The discovery process was eye-opening. We obtained credit card statements showing charges at luxury spas, high-end restaurants, and resort hotels. There were emails where Brenda and Patricia discussed how to categorize personal expenses to make them look business-related. One email from Brenda to Patricia read, "Just put it under community outreach and nobody will ask questions. These people do not even read the budget reports." That email, introduced as evidence in both the civil and criminal cases, was particularly damaging. It showed clear intent to deceive. The civil trial took place in June. The former board members mounted a weak defense, arguing that their expenses were reasonable and within their authority as board members. Their lawyers tried to claim that the HOA governing documents gave the board broad discretion over financial matters. Robert systematically destroyed these arguments. He showed that the governing documents explicitly restricted use of reserve funds to emergencies and major repairs. He demonstrated that the board had deliberately hidden their expenses from homeowners. He presented testimony from Linda Wu, the forensic accountant, who explained in clear terms how the board had committed fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a verdict in favor of the HOA. The former board members were jointly and severally liable for $78,000, which included the stolen funds, interest, and partial attorney's fees. The criminal trial began in August. I was called as a witness, along with Jennifer from the property management company and several other homeowners who had been fined or had requests for legitimate repairs, denied while the board was spending money on personal luxuries. The prosecution was handled by an assistant county attorney named Michael Chang, a sharp young lawyer who clearly relished the case. He methodically built a narrative of betrayal and greed, showing how the board members had violated the trust of hundreds of families. "These were not mistakes," Michael said in his opening statement. "These were not errors in judgment. These defendants systematically stole money from their neighbors and used it to fund a lifestyle they could not otherwise afford. They drank expensive wine while elderly homeowners skipped medication to pay unjust fines. They relaxed on beaches in Mexico while families struggled with increased HOA dues. This is theft, pure and simple, and it demands accountability." The defense attorneys tried to argue that the board members had genuinely believed their expenses were appropriate, and that there was no criminal intent. This argument was undermined by the emails showing deliberate concealment and by testimony from Jennifer, who said she had repeatedly questioned certain expenses and been told by Brenda to mind your own business. I testified on the third day of the trial. Michael asked me to describe the impact of the board's actions on the community. "It broke our trust," I said. "We elected these people to serve the community, and they betrayed us." People I know personally were fined hundreds of dollars for minor violations, while the board was spending thousands on luxury vacations. An elderly neighbor of mine cried in my doorway because she had to choose between medication and an HOA fine. Meanwhile, Brenda Hutchinson was sitting by a pool in Cancun drinking margaritas. That is not just financial crime, that is a violation of basic human decency. The jury was out for 2 days. Sarah and I waited anxiously, refreshing news websites and checking our phones constantly. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, we got word that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed again. Brenda sat at the defense table, her face pale. Patricia was crying quietly. Karen stared at her hands. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man in a plaid shirt, stood when asked if they had reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." "On the count of theft, how do you find the defendant Brenda Hutchinson?" "Guilty." "On the count of fraudulent schemes, how do you find the defendant Brenda Hutchinson?" "Guilty." The same verdicts came down for Patricia and Karen. Deborah and Linda were convicted of lesser charges related to their more limited roles in the scheme. Sentencing was scheduled for October. In the meantime, the community tried to move forward. The new HOA board, with Tom as president and Robert as treasurer, was working to rebuild trust and financial stability. One of their first actions was to reduce HOA dues by 10%, which was possible now that we were not funding luxury vacations. They also allocated funds for the playground equipment Sarah had requested, repaved the community center parking lot, and established a transparency policy requiring monthly financial reports to be posted online where any homeowner could review them. In September, we received partial restitution from the civil judgment. The former board members had begun selling assets to pay what they owed. Brenda sold her BMW and her timeshare in Sedona. Patricia liquidated her retirement account. The money went back into the HOA reserve fund, slowly rebuilding what had been stolen. I ran into Mrs. Chen at the grocery store one afternoon. She was in better spirits than I had seen her in months. "Mr. Martinez," she said, grabbing my arm, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. The new board refunded my fine from last year. They said it was unjustly imposed. That $200 means more to me than you know." "You do not have to thank me, Mrs. Chen," I said. "This is what the community should have been all along." The sentencing hearing in October was emotional. Several homeowners gave victim impact statements describing how the board's actions had affected them. Mrs. Chen spoke, her voice steady despite her tears, about the stress and anxiety of being fined for things beyond her control while living on $900 a month in Social Security. A young couple with 2 small children described how they had been denied a payment plan for special assessments, while the board was spending thousands on entertainment. A single mother explained how she had been threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fines totaling $600 for minor landscaping violations, while Brenda and Patricia were enjoying spa weekends. Judge Torres listened to all of this with a stern expression. When it came time to announce sentences, she did not mince words. "Mrs. Hutchinson, your actions represent a profound betrayal of trust. You were elected to serve your community, and instead, you exploited your position for personal gain. Your victims were your neighbors, people who trusted you. Some of them were elderly, living on fixed incomes. Some were young families struggling to make ends meet, and you took their money to fund a lifestyle of luxury and leisure. This court finds your conduct reprehensible." Brenda was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution and banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for life. Patricia received 2.5 years. Karen received 2 years. Deborah and Linda, whose roles had been more limited, received probation and community service, along with restitution requirements. As the bailiffs led Brenda away, she looked back at the courtroom one more time. Her eyes met mine briefly, and I saw not anger but defeat. She had gambled that she could get away with it, that nobody would pay attention or care enough to hold her accountable. She had been wrong. Outside the courthouse, reporters from local news stations wanted statements. Tom handled most of it, explaining that this case demonstrated the importance of transparency and accountability in HOA governance. "This was not about vengeance," Tom said into the camera. This was about justice and making sure something like this never happens again. HOA boards have significant power over people's lives and finances. That power must be exercised responsibly and with oversight. A reporter asked me if I felt the sentences were fair. "I think they were appropriate," I said. What they did was not a victimless crime. They hurt real people, they broke trust, and there have to be consequences for that. Over the following months, life in Sunset Meadows slowly returned to normal, or at least a better version of normal. The new board instituted quarterly town halls where any homeowner could raise concerns or ask questions about finances. They established a formal appeals process for fines and violations, ensuring that nobody would be arbitrarily penalized for minor issues. The reserve fund was replenished through a combination of restitution payments and careful budgeting. By the end of the year, we were back to a healthy financial position. Sarah and I talked about the whole experience one evening while sitting by our pool, watching the kids splash around. "Do you think it was worth it?" Sarah asked. "All the time and stress and meetings." I thought about it for a moment. Absolutely. If we had not done anything, they would have kept stealing. Other board members in other communities might have thought they could get away with the same thing. What we did sent a message that there are limits, that people are paying attention, and that actions have consequences. "You sound like a civics teacher," Sarah said, smiling. "Maybe I should have been one," I said. "This whole thing taught me a lot about how important it is to pay attention to local governance. We get so focused on national politics and big issues that we forget the people who have the most immediate impact on our lives are often right here in our own neighborhoods." The following spring, Tom decided not to run for re-election as HOA president. He had served his purpose, helping to steady the ship and restore trust, but he wanted to get back to his life and family. A woman named Jessica Park, a CPA with 2 kids in the neighborhood, ran for the position and won easily. Robert stayed on as treasurer, committed to maintaining the financial oversight that had been so lacking before. I attended the first board meeting under Jessica's leadership. It was refreshingly boring. They discussed landscaping contracts, a proposal to install electric vehicle charging stations in the community center parking lot, and updates on routine maintenance. No luxury vacations, no secret expenditures, just the mundane work of keeping a community running smoothly. As I walked home after the meeting, I passed Mrs. Chen's house. Her rosebushes, whatever shade of pink they happened to be, were blooming beautifully in the Arizona spring. She was outside watering them, and she waved when she saw me. "Beautiful evening," she called out. "It really is," I agreed, and it was. Not because anything spectacular was happening, but because things were as they should be. People were taking care of their homes, raising their families, and living their lives without the constant stress of wondering what their HOA board was up to or whether they would be fined for some arbitrary violation. The criminal restitution payments came in monthly installments. Brenda was in prison in Florence, Arizona, serving her sentence. According to public records, she had been assigned to work in the prison kitchen. Patricia and Karen were at different facilities. All 3 would emerge eventually, their lives permanently altered by their choices. I sometimes wondered if they understood the full scope of what they had done, or if they still viewed themselves as victims of an unfair system. I suspected it was probably the latter. People who commit white-collar crimes often struggle to see themselves as criminals. They rationalize, minimize, and deflect blame. But intention does not change impact. Whether they meant to hurt people or not, they did, and that hurt was real. The 1-year anniversary of the infamous Cancun photo passed quietly. Someone posted it in the community Facebook group as a "remember when" joke, and the comments were mostly laughing emojis and references to how much had changed. The anger had faded, replaced by a kind of satisfied closure. Justice had been served. The community had healed. Life had moved on. In December, I received a letter in the mail from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. It was a formal notification that full restitution had been paid. Between the liquidation of assets, monthly payments, and funds recovered through the civil judgment, the HOA had received every dollar that had been stolen, plus interest. I brought the letter to the next board meeting and shared it with Jessica and Robert. Jessica smiled, a genuine expression of relief and satisfaction. "That is the end of that chapter," she said. "We should celebrate." "Let's not go to Cancun," Robert deadpanned, and we all laughed. Instead, the board organized a community barbecue at the community center. It was held on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and nearly half the neighborhood showed up. There were burgers and hot dogs, a bounce house for the kids, and a general atmosphere of good feeling. Tom stood up at one point and clinked a beer bottle to get everyone's attention. "I just want to say a few words," he announced. "A year and a half ago, we discovered that our trust had been violated and our money had been stolen. A lot of people would have just complained and moved on, but this community chose to fight back. You demanded accountability, you showed up to meetings, you voted, and you supported a legal process that brought justice. I am proud to live here, not because we have nice houses or good schools, but because we have neighbors who care enough to make things right." There was applause and someone shouted, "Hear, hear." I looked around at the faces of my neighbors. These were people I had lived near for years, but had not really known until this crisis forced us to come together. Adversity had built something valuable, a sense of real community, not just a planned development with matching mailboxes. Emma and Jake were playing with other kids near the bounce house, their laughter carrying across the lawn. Sarah was talking with Maria and a few other moms, sharing stories and jokes. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. This was what the HOA was supposed to protect and enhance. Not just property values, but quality of life, the simple pleasure of living in a place where people looked out for each other and held each other accountable. In early February, I received another unexpected piece of mail. It was a handwritten letter from Brenda Hutchinson, postmarked from the prison in Florence. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages long, written in careful cursive on lined paper. Brenda apologized, though the apology was couched in explanations and justifications. She talked about how stressed she had been, how much time she had devoted to the HOA, how she had felt unappreciated. She admitted that she had made mistakes, but claimed she had never intended to hurt anyone. The letter ended with a request. "I hope that someday you and the other homeowners can forgive me. I know I cannot undo what I did, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry for the pain I caused." I read it twice, trying to discern whether the apology was genuine or just another attempt at manipulation. I decided it did not really matter. Whether Brenda was truly remorseful or not did not change what had happened, or how we had responded. She had committed crimes, faced consequences, and would have to live with that for the rest of her life. I filed the letter away in a folder with all the other documents from the case and did not respond. There was nothing left to say. By spring, Sunset Meadows had fully recovered. The reserve fund was healthy, the community amenities were well maintained, and the board was functioning with transparency and integrity. New homeowners moving into the development heard the story of what had happened and were reassured that the community took accountability seriously. I ran into Officer Rodriguez, the police officer who had first taken my report at a coffee shop in Gilbert. He recognized me and came over to shake my hand. "I wanted to tell you that case made a difference," he said. "We have had 2 other HOA fraud investigations since then, both from communities that heard about what happened in Sunset Meadows. People are paying attention now. They are not just accepting that the board knows best. That is a good thing." "I am glad something positive came from it," I said. "More than you know," Officer Rodriguez replied. "White-collar crime often goes unreported because people think nothing will happen or it is too complicated. You showed that the system can work if people are willing to use it." As I drove home that afternoon, I reflected on the entire journey. It had started with a single careless email, an accidental reply all that exposed what was supposed to stay hidden. From there, it had cascaded into investigations, legal proceedings, criminal convictions, and ultimately systemic change. The lesson, I thought, was about vigilance. It was easy to become complacent, to trust that people in positions of authority were acting in good faith. But trust had to be earned and maintained through transparency and accountability. The moment we stopped paying attention was the moment people like Brenda Hutchinson could exploit the system. In April, I attended the annual HOA meeting, the first one under the new governance structure that had been implemented after the scandal. The meeting included a detailed financial presentation, a question-and-answer session, and elections for open board positions. It was well attended, with homeowners who were engaged and informed. Jessica Park gave a presentation on the year's finances, complete with charts and graphs showing exactly where every dollar had gone. There were no vague categories, no mysterious line items, just clear accounting that anyone could understand. "Transparency is not just a buzzword for us," Jessica said. "It is a commitment. You have a right to know how your money is being spent, and we have an obligation to show you. If you ever have questions or concerns, my door is always open. Well, my email is always open." "You know what I mean." People laughed, and the meeting continued in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. During the question-and-answer session, someone asked about security measures to prevent future fraud. Robert Chen addressed this question, explaining the checks and balances that had been put in place. "No single person can authorize expenditures over $500, Robert said. "All significant expenses require 2 signatures. We have quarterly audits by an independent accountant, and financial reports are posted online within 5 days of month-end. We have also updated our bylaws to include criminal background checks for board candidates and term limits to prevent entrenchment." The measures were approved unanimously. As the meeting wrapped up, I felt a sense of completion. The crisis that had consumed so much of my time and energy over the past year was truly over. The wounds had healed, the systems had been fixed, and life had returned to normal. But it was a better normal, informed by hard-won lessons about accountability, community, and the importance of paying attention to the people we entrust with authority. Sarah and I walked home hand in hand, the kids running ahead of us in the warm Arizona evening. Our house came into view, its Spanish tile roof silhouetted against the darkening sky. It was just a house, 4 walls and a roof, but it represented something more now, a community we had fought for and helped to save. "Do you think you will ever run for the HOA board?" Sarah asked, a teasing note in her voice. "God, no," I said immediately. "I have done my civic duty. Let someone else take a turn," she laughed. "Good. I do not think I could handle you becoming an HOA warrior full-time." "I am a reluctant warrior at best," I said. "I just want to live my life, raise my kids, and not worry about whether the board is stealing our money." "Well, mission accomplished," Sarah said. We reached our house and went inside. Emma and Jake were already arguing about what to watch on TV. The dishwasher was beeping, needing to be unloaded. The dog needed to be walked. Life, in all its mundane glory, continued. And that, ultimately, was the point of everything we had fought for. The right to live our lives without corruption, exploitation, or abuse of power interfering with the simple pleasures of home and family and community. The story of the Sunset Meadows HOA scandal became something of a legend in Gilbert. People in other neighborhoods would reference it when discussing their own HOA issues. Local news outlets did follow-up stories on the anniversary of the convictions. A community college professor even asked if she could interview me for a case study on civic engagement. I declined most of these requests. I was not interested in being the face of HOA reform or a spokesperson for accountability. I had simply done what needed to be done when confronted with wrongdoing. That was not heroism, it was basic decency. But I did agree to speak to a journalism class at Arizona State University about the importance of documentation and evidence in holding powerful people accountable. The students listened attentively as I described how we had collected financial records, organized community members, and built a case that could stand up in court. The truth is powerful, I told them, but only if you can prove it. We could have suspected the board was stealing, but without documentation, it would have just been speculation. The records were what made the difference, so keep records, take screenshots, save emails. You never know when you will need them. One student raised her hand. Were you ever afraid of retaliation? Honestly, no, I said. Brenda Hutchinson was many things, but physically threatening was not one of them. The worst she could do was fine me for having my trash cans out too long, and at a certain point, I stopped caring about that. When you know you are right and you have the evidence to prove it, it is hard to be intimidated. The months continued to pass. Brenda Hutchinson became eligible for parole and was denied. She would serve at least another 6 months before her next hearing. Patricia and Karen were also serving their sentences, gradually fading from community consciousness as the neighborhood moved on. In June, Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 87 years old. Her son Robert told me that she had been happy in her final months, relieved of the stress and anxiety that had plagued her during the Brenda Hutchinson era. "She talked about you, you know," Robert said at the memorial service. "She said you gave her hope that ordinary people could still make a difference. That meant a lot to her." I did not know how to respond to that except to say that she had inspired me too, and that her courage in speaking out had mattered. The memorial service was held in the community center, and it was packed with neighbors who had known and loved Mrs. Chen. People shared stories of her kindness, her resilience, and her beautiful garden. It struck me that this was what community was really about. Not rules and regulations and bylaws, but people caring for each other and showing up when it mattered. As summer turned to fall, I found myself thinking less and less about the HOA drama. It had become history, a story we told but no longer lived. The scars had healed, leaving behind only the lessons learned. One evening in October, almost exactly 2 years after the infamous Cancun photo, I was sitting on my back patio with Tom, drinking beer and watching the sunset. Our kids were in the pool, supervised by Sarah and Tom's wife, Linda. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Tom asked. "How do you mean?" "If Patricia had not accidentally sent that photo to everyone, if we had not noticed or cared, if we had just shrugged and figured it was not worth the effort to fight." I considered this. "Yeah, I think about it sometimes. They would have kept stealing. Maybe eventually they would have gotten caught, or maybe they would have just drained the reserve fund and moved on with their lives. We would have been stuck with the bill. It is crazy how much can hinge on one stupid mistake," Tom said. "One accidental reply all and 5 people end up in prison." "They did not end up in prison because of a reply all," I corrected. "They ended up in prison because they committed crimes. The reply all just exposed it." If they had not been stealing in the first place, there would have been nothing to expose. Tom nodded. Fair point, still, it is wild how it all went down. We sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the kids' laughter and the ambient sounds of the neighborhood winding down for the evening. I am glad we live here, Tom said eventually. Not just because of the house or the schools, but because when things went wrong, people stepped up. That is rare. It should not be, I said, but yeah, I know what you mean. The following week, I received notification that Brenda Hutchinson had been transferred to a work release program, which meant she would serve the remainder of her sentence working during the day and returning to a facility at night. She had 18 months left before completing her full sentence. I felt nothing in particular about this news. Not satisfaction, not anger, just a kind of neutral acknowledgement. The wheels of justice had turned, and they would continue turning with or without my attention. In December, the HOA sent out a newsletter highlighting accomplishments from the past year. New landscaping in the common areas, upgraded security lighting, a successful community movie night, and a holiday toy drive that collected over 300 gifts for local children in need. The newsletter included a financial summary showing a healthy reserve fund and responsible spending. This, I thought, was what good governance looked like. Not exciting, not dramatic, just competent people doing their jobs and serving the community without fanfare or corruption. As 2025 drew to a close and 2026 began, life in Sunset Meadows continued its peaceful rhythm. The scandal that had once dominated every conversation was now just a part of the community's history, a cautionary tale and a reminder of the importance of vigilance. I had learned that ordinary people, armed with nothing but determination and evidence, could hold powerful people accountable. I had learned that communities were stronger than they often realized, capable of coming together when it mattered. And I had learned that justice, while sometimes slow and frustrating, was still possible if you were willing to fight for it. On a warm evening in March 2026, exactly 2 years after the Cancun photo had changed everything, I stood in my driveway watching Emma and Jake ride their bikes around the cul-de-sac. Sarah was next to me, her hand in mine. "You know what I appreciate most about all of this," Sarah said. "What?" "We are not talking about it anymore. It is over. Really, truly over." She was right. The crisis that had consumed our lives for months was now just a memory, no longer defining our present or our future. A car pulled up, and Jessica Park got out carrying a clipboard. She was doing a neighborhood walkthrough, checking on common area issues. "Evening, David, Sarah," she called out. "Everything good?" "Everything is great," I replied, and it was. The house was in good repair, the kids were healthy and happy, the neighborhood was well managed, and my biggest concern was whether we needed to repaint the fence this year, or if it could wait until next year. These were the problems I wanted to have. Normal, boring, everyday problems, not criminal conspiracies or financial fraud or community upheaval. Just life, proceeding as it should, in a place where people looked out for each other and held each other accountable. As darkness fell and I called the kids inside for dinner, I took one last look around the neighborhood. Lights were coming on in houses up and down the street. People were coming home from work, making dinner, helping kids with homework, living their lives in the quiet comfort of knowing their community was in good hands. This was what we had fought for. This peace, this normalcy, this trust. And standing there in my driveway on an ordinary Tuesday evening, I knew it had been worth every meeting, every document reviewed, every difficult conversation, every moment of stress and uncertainty. We had taken back our community from people who had betrayed our trust. We had demanded accountability and achieved justice. And in doing so, we had built something stronger and better than what had existed before. The Cancun photo that had started it all was now just a punchline, a reminder of arrogance and entitlement brought low. Brenda Hutchinson and her cronies had learned, the hard way, that trust was earned and that betraying it carried consequences. But more importantly, every homeowner in Sunset Meadows had learned that their voices mattered, that collective action was powerful, and that ordinary people could affect real change when they chose to care enough to try. As I walked inside to join my family for dinner, I felt profound gratitude for the community we had become, forged in the fire of crisis and emerging stronger on the other side. The emergency fund that had been stolen and then recovered was more than just money. It was a symbol of our resilience and our refusal to accept corruption as inevitable. The story had a clean ending, justice served and lessons learned. But the real victory was not in the courtroom or the settlements or even the criminal convictions. The real victory was in the hundreds of families living their lives in peace, confident that the people managing their community were doing so with integrity and accountability. And that, ultimately, was worth more than any amount of money could ever be.